Right, so today I'm going to show you why spending less than 90 days in the UK might not be enough to be considered a non-tax resident. I'm Leo, I help online entrepreneurs legally reduce their taxes while living abroad. And obviously as part of this, there's a lot of people from the UK that would like to leave to reduce their taxes. Now, a lot of people throw out, you need to spend less than 90 days in the UK to not be a tax resident. That's true most of the times, but I want you to realize that there is a bit of nuance into this. So I'm going to show you exactly from the government's website so then you can make your own conclusions. So there's this thing in the UK called statutory residency test, or SRT, and it shows you exactly whether you're a tax resident or not. So let's go and look it up together. You just type it on Google and you just click the first link. And this test, as it says here, will allow you to work out your resident status for a tax year. Are you a tax resident, i.e. do you need to pay taxes in that country, or are you not? And each tax year is looked at separately. So again, you may be resident in the UK in one year, but not the other. And it's important to know that in the UK, the tax year goes from April to April, right? From the 6th of April to the 5th of April, which by the way is also my birthday. So it takes into account, there's different parts, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Basically, there's 3 different tests. The automatic overseas test. If you meet any of these, you're not a tax resident. Then there's the automatic UK tests. If you meet any of these, you are a tax resident. And then the sufficient ties test. If you meet this, you are a tax resident. So let's get started. This is, it's just saying a few things. Obviously, this works like a flow chart. So if you don't meet any of these, then you go down to this test. If you don't meet any of these, then you go down to the final test, right? So automatic overseas test. And I'm going to show you why 90 days, you might have to spend less than 45 days even if you want to be completely sure. So first, automatic overseas test. So this is, if you meet this, you are not a tax resident of the UK. You'll be non-UK resident for the tax year if you were resident in the UK from one or more of the 3 tax years. So basically, if you've been living in the UK for any of the 3 past tax years, and you spend fewer than 16 days in the UK. So basically, if you spend less than 16 days in the UK, you're not a tax resident. By the way, this probably doesn't apply to you, right? Because you're probably spending more than 16 days. Second test, you'll be non-UK resident for the tax year if you were resident in the UK for none of the 3 tax years before the current tax year. So this is usually for someone who's arriving into the UK. If you've been living in the UK and now you're leaving, this does not apply to you because you were probably a tax resident for the 3 years before the current tax year. So this probably does not apply to you. So then we go down to the third one, and this is where most people fall, right? Because this is why people say you can spend less than 90 days in the UK and be fine. So it says you'll be non-UK resident for the tax year if you work full-time overseas over the tax year and you're an entrepreneur, so you've got a full-time job technically, and if you've moved from the UK, you're working overseas, so this is fine. And you spend fewer than 91 days in the UK in the tax year, so 90 days, and this is exactly what people tell you. And then the number of days on which you work for more than 3 hours in the UK is less than 31. So what does this mean? To be considered a non-UK tax resident, you need to spend, yes, less than 91 days, but less than 31 of those need to be spent working. So now, there is no significant break, but again, entrepreneurship, there really isn't any breaks. The question you may be asking is, okay, well, what counts as work? Like, you're an entrepreneur, does making content count as work? Does being on meetings, does brainstorming, journaling, like what counts as number of days in which you work? And the truth is, I always say this in my videos and to people I meet, the tax system is pretty outdated. This online work kind of thing only really popped off after COVID. No one really worked online before. Like, yeah, you had the first pioneers of Facebook ads and online marketing. You had first e-com people back in 2013, but this online space only really popped off recently. It is going to be tough to prove and to establish what is a workday. Now, the good news is, if you don't move to a tax haven, if you don't move to Panama, if you don't move to Dubai, which even Dubai I think now is off the blacklist for the European Union, it's on the UK to prove that you're still a tax resident. So basically, they would have to prove that you're working more than 3 hours in the UK for more than 31 days. And this is hard, if you don't have an office, if you just live at home, Yes, they can go off content, like meaning how many days are you posting content? Maybe they can go off history of calls, I don't know, but it's very complicated. It's very, how are they going to prove that you weren't working for more than 31 days? Like, it's very hard to prove. But then again, if you were, like, because you are probably thinking, I probably was, but how are they going to prove it? That's on you. But if someone were to look at your life 24/7, you're an entrepreneur, you're probably working every day of those 90 days that you're in the UK. Of course, it's very hard for HMRC to prove this, but if you were to be completely transparent, you're probably working more than the 31 days that it says here within the 91-day period. So again, if you say they're probably not going to find out, I don't care, it's going to be super hard for them, then sure, you meet this test and you don't have to pay UK taxes. Happy days, right? But what if you say, okay, I think I'm gonna make tens of millions of pounds and I'm gonna keep them in my UK bank accounts, because the more money you make, the more you need to make your case airtight, right? The more money you make, the more the HMRC is going to want to, take a look at what you're doing and your operations to make sure that you're doing everything fine. And if they can tax you, like, look, money attracts a lot of eyes, right? And HMRC is a business just like mine, just like yours. If someone's making millions, they see that there's a chance to make a lot of revenue, right, by taxing them. So if you've got loads of money, they're going to look into this and they're going to try and prove it. And especially if you were working more than 31 of those days, then you're in danger, right? So I would try to do everything to prove that you weren't working 31 of those days. Maybe like show you were on holiday with your family, right? But then you're vlogging, so that also kind of counts as work. This is just to say that there's a very blurry line and you are still a bit in the crossfire if you decide to go with this test and say, yes, I meet this test, because maybe you don't. But anyways, moving on. If you meet this test, fine, there's no need to go further. Let's say you don't meet this test and say, okay, yeah, Leo, I was working more than 31 days. Then we go to the next test, the automatic UK test. So if you meet any of these, you're a tax resident. So we don't want to meet these. Spend 183 days or more in the UK in a tax year, paying taxes, that's standard, anywhere in the world. The second automatic UK test is you'll be UK resident for the tax year if you have or have had a home in the UK for all or part of the year and the following apply. And this can also be a relative's place, by the way. There is or was at least one period of 90 consecutive days when you had a home in the UK. At least 30 of these 91 days falls in the tax year when you have a home in the UK and you've been present in that home for at least 30 days at any time during the year. Let me paraphrase this. Basically, if you lived at your parents' house and you're moving out, there's probably a room available for you and you can probably go back. So you definitely meet this, and you definitely meet this as well, because when you go home, I don't expect you to be in Airbnbs. You're probably staying at home for more than 30 days, right? So you probably meet this test as well, but you probably don't meet this one. At that time, you had no overseas home, or if you had an overseas home, you were present in it for fewer than 30 days in the tax year. So what does this mean? If you're just going Airbnb to Airbnb and you're staying like 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks in every single place, then you'd actually meet this test and you'd be automatically a UK tax resident. But most of you probably, you'll go to Thailand, you'll go to Malaysia, you'll go to Bali, and you'll have like a rental agreement for like 2 to 3 months or something like that, even though it's not super long. That still can count as an overseas home. And if you spend more than 30 days in that home, then you don't meet this exact test. So then you don't meet the whole second automatic UK. Because yes, you meet this point, yes, you meet this point, but see, all of the following need to apply. So this needs to apply as well. So if you spend fewer than 30 days in the tax year in any overseas home, then yeah, you're a tax resident. But as I mentioned, most of you, maybe you're in Bali, maybe you have a house in Brazil, I don't know. Probably have a rental agreement for a couple of months. So if you spend more than 30 days in any one property, then you don't meet this, which means you don't meet this test, so which means we need to go down to the third automatic UK test, which is you'll be a UK resident for the tax year, again, if all of the following apply. You work full-time in the UK for any period of 365 days. Again, you've got an online business. This is not true. Scrap this test, you don't meet this one as well. Let's say you don't meet any of the top tests, Now we're going into the sufficient ties test, which is the final test that will determine whether you are or you're not a tax resident. So use this test to work out your resident status if you don't meet either of these, which you don't. And these are the tests, these are the ties that we need to take a look at. There's also a country tie, that's fine. And then this will tell you the number of ties that you need to be a tax resident. So let's go in detail to the ties, like what are these ties, what do they mean? Am I a tax resident or not? This is the first tie, a family tie. Individual will have a family tie for the tax year if any of the following people are UK resident in their own right. Husband, wife, or civil partner. Partner if they are living together as husband and wife or civil partners, or their child if under 18 years old. I assume you're watching, you're probably not married. If you're married, your wife is not in the UK, and you probably don't have a kid under 18-year-old that is in the UK while you are traveling. So I assume, let's take a look at this to keep track. This is a no, that you don't have a family tie. And maybe this is different for you, but let's say this is a no. Second is an accommodation tie. So let's just go here, next. So full-time education of children. I mean, yeah, you probably don't have children, right? The second test is the accommodation tie, and you probably meet this, and let me walk you through it. The individual will have an accommodation tie if they have a place to live in the UK, and again, this might be a parent's house or relative's house, and it is available to them for a continuous period of 91 days or more during that tax year, and they spend one or more nights there during that year. So basically, do you have a place? If you have your own place, have you spent one or more nights in there? Which is probably yes. In most cases, you don't have a place, your parents have a place. So if it's the home of a close relative, so here for the purposes of the accommodation, close relative, parent, grandparent, brother or sister, this is probably the one you need to talk about. If it's the home of a close relative, you spend 16 or more nights there during the year. Now I assume that when you come back, you probably stay at home. And if you spend more than 16 nights at home, then this tie, you have this tie. It's available for them continuous period of 91 days. Again, if you have a house at home, like your room is probably empty, maybe not, right? So if, for example, say your parents had a house and you had the room available, but someone was living in that room, maybe a cousin comes from Australia to the UK and they live in your room and you actually don't have a bedroom available and you don't actually have a place to stay, then you don't meet this, right? And then this tie is a no. But for most of you, probably grew up in some place in England and you had your own room and you had your own bed at least, and when you leave, that's just available. So you meet this, and probably when you go back home, you go back to your parents and you probably spend 16 nights there. So the accommodation tie is a yes for most people. Again, we're gonna talk about why and how. And again, I'm trying to show you why 90 days might not be enough. So the next tie is a work tie. The individual will have a work tie if they do more than 3 hours of work a day in the UK for at least 40 days in that year. It doesn't matter if the days are continuous or intermittent. So the thing is, this is a big gray area, and it's basically the same as what it was for the previous one. I don't know if you remember the automatic overseas test, right? This one here. The number of days in which you work for more than 3 hours is less than 31. Like, if you just want to say that you don't work, then fine. You know, you don't work when you go back to the UK. But if you want to be completely honest, and you probably do work for more than 40 days within those 90 days period, this is a yes as well. Because if you say this is a no, then this is a no as well. So then you just meet this. We don't even need to go to the ties. So I'm going to assume that this is a yes. Right? I'm going to assume that this is a yes, unless, again, you want to literally prove that you weren't working more than 40 days. I would try and build a proper, consistent log of what you were doing every single day. Like, if you're not working, like, track it down, write it down. It's just very annoying, right? And again, you're probably not going to get audited for this stuff. Like, usually 90 days is fine. But, you know, if someone were to look at this case, like, now we need to prove, okay, we haven't worked. You know, I've spent here maybe 80 days out of the 90. I only worked half of those days. And that's, again, annoying to prove because, you know, again, for online entrepreneurs, it's quite complicated to determine what is work, what isn't, right? Or athletes, you know, does going to the gym count as work? Probably not under HMRC's view, but, you know, for us, business as usual, right? And look, there's examples here, like what counts as work, what counts as doesn't, but like there's no examples yet for like online entrepreneurs. It's just weird. So it's all a bit blurry. But let's say, devil's advocate, work tie is a yes. Okay, we are working more than 40 days in the UK. Yes. yes, and then the 90-day tie. So the 90-day tie literally asks if you spent more than 90 days in the UK in either or both of the previous 2 tax years immediately before the year under consideration. So this basically means, say you leave the UK in 1 year, the years before, had you spent 90 days in the UK? The answer is probably yes. Like if you were living in the UK and then you leave, of course for the previous 2 years you were going to spend 90 days. So this is probably a yes. If you were living in the UK and then you're leaving, this tie is a yes, like most definitely. This might become a no further along the line, like after a couple of years that you've been out spending less than 90 days. At the 3rd year, this becomes a no. So then you can, no problem, spend less than 90 days. But this is, for now, it's a yes. And then the final test is the country tie, which basically asks which country is the one where you spent the most amount of days. Individuals have a country tie for a tax year if the UK is the country which they were present at midnight for the greatest number of days. If you're just digital nomading around and you're spending like a month here, a month there, a month everywhere, you might actually meet this and you might actually be fucked. But most people, they actually spend more time in one country than in the UK. You know, if you're moving to Thailand, you're probably spending maybe 4 months in Thailand, like more than 90 days that you spend in the UK anyways, or maybe in Bali, right? Or maybe in Brazil, maybe it's somewhere else. But you're probably spending more time in one country than the UK. So maybe it's not true. Maybe the UK is the country you spend the most time in that tax year. Again, we're talking April to April. But most of the times there is going to be one country, you know, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, where you spend more time than in the UK. So there's usually a no, right? So the UK is not the country where you spend the most days. So here you are with your 3 ties. Right? Out of the 5, you have 3 of them. So then if we go here to the results, we need to look at this table, right? So there's table A, table B, these are very similar, but this one's for people leaving. If you were UK resident for 1 or more of the 3 tax years, this basically means were you living in the UK before you left, which is a yes. So basically you look at these ties and you're like, oh shit, I've got 3 ties. This means that I'm a tax resident if I spend over 46 days. Like for 46 days and above, I'm a UK resident. So you're sat here and you're thinking, wow, so it's not the 90 days. Because see, 90 days is when you've got 2 ties. So you need to look at the number of ties. And again, if this work tie, for example, or you know, the accommodation tie, if this is a no, then you have only 2 ties. And then this is how much you need to be a tax resident. We want to be under, obviously. But if you have the 3 ties, like most people do, this makes us a tax resident. So we need to spend 45 days or less to actually not be a tax resident in the UK. Just realize this, because it's important. And obviously after a couple of years that you're out, then you probably won't meet the 90-day ties anymore. Remember, this was if you spend more than 90 days for any of the 2 previous years. So once you've been spending less than 90 days for a couple of years, this becomes a no. So then you only have 2 ties, and then this is the amount you need to spend under to not be a tax resident. So then 90 days, it's like, cool. After the first couple of years, you're fine just spending 90 days. But for the first 2 years, these first 2 transition years, most people will just assume spend less than 90 days, and you know, this work tie, they'll just ignore the fact that you actually need to work less than 31 days. But the truth is, if you actually were completely honest with what you're doing, you would actually go all the way down here, have 3 ties, and actually need to spend less than 46 days to be considered a non-UK tax resident. So be careful about this. Again, this is your life, your decisions. It depends on your risk appetite as well. How much do you want to risk an audit or anything? But be careful, because for the first couple of years, the exact number of days you might need to spend in the UK is not less than 90, it's less than 46. So be careful about that. If you want my help to go over your exact situation, you can book a consultation call one-on-one with me, clicking the first link in the description. Thank you for watching.